Welcome, everybody, to the Good Data Podcast. Great interview today. We have Keith Perry on the phone. Keith is the owner and managing member of DAO Technologies. DAO is a technology management and consulting organization, and they specialize in free and open source solutions. One of the first things that interested me about Keith is that he's got an electrical engineering background. He's got a BS from Drexel, which means that he's got a handle on the full stack of the data center. We went into cybersecurity. He's got an MS in that from Drexel. His company focuses on integrating systems from hardware to software for large projects. As always, this is a free-flowing discussion. Keith is a proponent of colocation. He's wary of the public cloud, but he's in favor of managed services. Just don't call it cloud. Great guy. Great conversation. I don't always get to talk with someone who consults on the front lines with end users, so it was great to get insights into the SMB space with Keith. Let's go. Hey Keith, how you doing?
Busy day, surprisingly.
I know, we're all busy, so I really appreciate when anybody takes the time to talk with me. Actually, the sound on this sounds really good. This is your bridge?
Yeah, it's just we do. I've been doing voice over IP since. The beauty of voice over IP is that as you're saying, and most people say that the sound quality is amazing. Yeah, voice is coming back.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of VoIP integrators, and that it's something that does make money, and it's still a big deal, especially with somebody who has like a sound background. Because you were saying that you have like your own recording studio, so having that sort of like ability to think about the sound part too, which I think is mostly it's just the tech stuff, but it's kind of fun to be able to do both.
Yeah, I think ultimately, every business is about people, and there's essentially if you like to be in front of people, if you can't be in front of people, the next thing is picking up a phone. All the other stuff is great, and you can do video conferencing, you can do messaging and other things like that. But I think when it comes down to building relationships and that side of any business, but obviously when you're in tech, I think it's even more important. A lot of people think it's less important because, oh, hey, we're in tech. We don't need to talk. We can send emails. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. You still need to know other things. Like you said, sound is important. But, these days, the basic codecs, which we used to sort of clamp down on because of bandwidth issues, are 64K, which is the old, essentially, that's your basic phone codec. It was 64K wide, regular TDM channel. And then you get to the digital stuff, it would be sometimes a little bit higher, sometimes a little bit lower. So it might be a 56K, but it may be as high as 80K, depending on what you were doing. And this essentially has, these days you can overdo it. I tell people all the time, you don't need much for voice now. And I'll run systems on small embedded devices. You can run, 10 people at a time on there, and it's not going to break a sweat. So that's why I say it's coming back a bit. You still need your voicemail stuff, your greeting, your menu for that big business presence and things like that. So it's good. And throwing this stuff within the data center now is, I tell people all the time, this is so simple. Just move you can move your PBX and you'll be fine. You have to worry about internet, but for a lot of people it makes sense.
Oh yeah. I mean, more and more, everything can go in the data center. And it was such a long time that the PBX was actually this hardwired, kind of monolithic system. And now it takes almost nothing. But a good transition there to get to data centers, because I know you're a data center guy, and that's sort of most of what the show is about. And I know that on your LinkedIn profile, it talks about mainframes and AS400 and all that stuff. So how did you get your start in data centers, and how did you continue to work that way?
So going back to, I guess, my college years, and I went to Drexel, so I was able to take advantage of a co-op there that helped quite a bit. I ended up working for Sony for a year's worth of time. And not that it was quite a data center, but coming through the 90s, I was working in larger and larger data rooms. We used to call it the server room, right? And the server room changed in terms of what it was in favor of these new things called data centers. So when I was sort of, I guess, mid 90s or so, leaving Sony, and I did work for Drexel's computer center while I was a student, and certainly we were into mainframes there. But then as I got into my consulting career, there was like an explosion of this stuff. I mean, really, probably two explosions. There was the pre-tech bubble, sort of late 90s explosion, and then there was the post-tech bubble, where you had people really trying to figure out what they're going to do with all this technology. So I think when I think of data centers, it's more amorphous to me because I never really was stationed in one. I was always consulting in one, or I was maybe delivering product and doing a setup for an organization. Just lots of companies over the years, and it was just this transition. The data rooms got bigger, then they got smaller, then people moved to the larger places. Here in Philadelphia, 401 North Broad is sort of the quintessential data center that most people in the region knew about, and the evolution of that happened because of so much business being done in this space in the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, most of GDP comes from our area, so it only makes sense that you'd have a lot of people looking for space. So it was very slow, and I saw a lot of transitions into the modern data center.
Yeah, it's amazing how much it's changed, and even something like 401 North Broad, mm-hmm. It's been built on top of itself, and it's an old building that just continues to evolve and take get rid of old cabling, or sometimes not get rid of it, and you can almost go in there and see the history of almost computation just sitting there, at least the history of the internet sitting there.
Yeah. It's very relevant to this area. And you're right. It's historical. I mean, you go into like the Tier Point shipyard facility. I mean, that's like the ultra modern modular construction. You go out to what's now Flex Central, which is the old GSK data center. I was there. I was actually in that facility before it was actually right. I was there for maybe about a month and a half after it was sold. That's another world class facility. Everything over engineered.
I saw that right before it was sold, and it is it's monumental. It's gigantic.
Oh yes. The Australians would say ginormous, right?
Yeah.
So that's good people there. I know the guy used to run that, and but then you've got smaller outfits. You look at Data 365, right? In University City. It's a smaller one floor, but you go in there, and it's sort of it's not the ultra modern, but it's still it's up to date. It's what you would expect. It's not over the top. It's not like going into Oak Ridge, right? Right. It's not like one of those. It's not bleeding edge or anything like that. But the concept, I think we're playing with the concept of the data center much more these days. There's a lot of vibrance in what the emerging needs are, and it's exciting again to really see a hard focus on that, not because of what's going in it, but the actual infrastructure itself.
Yeah. So what specifically do you tend to do in data centers? We barely even touched on it yet, but you're like a software guy, but you also do a lot of other things. So what specifically are you doing when you're going into a data center?
Yeah, I consider myself mostly be a hardware guy because I've been, playing around with the stuff for so long. I was the kid I was tinkering. I'm sort of electronics nerd, if you will. But for our customers and data, in terms of their operations, we're doing it all in the data center. We'll go in, build, everything from installing. I mean, the physical part of delivering the rack, getting installed, the electrical integration into, into the facility power, putting, stacking the nodes in, hooking them up, burning in the OS, and now we're into the software world. Okay, well, is this a compute cluster, or is this, segmented out? Is it multi-customer? What are the networking requirements? So, top of rack operations, where what's a switch fabric, right? We're looking at that. We're doing that stuff. So it could be anything. Most of it these days, I think most of us, you're doing software just because that's the thing that is going to change. I won't say change the most, but I tend to be, when I think of infrastructure, my thing is that infrastructure changes the least because it's structural. If you're constantly moving your structure around, there's a natural instability. So we try not to do a lot of that. Most of the time, we are going to be doing software installs and the overall management for customers. So you're in software most of the time, but we do everything. I mean, there's nothing there at the beginning of the day, and by the end of the day, you've got something.
So how much of your customers are actually in colocation? How many are still on premise and hug their servers like that?
Probably 30% with a what I would call a serious co-located or data center presence. There's flux there in that, again, as we're trying to understand what to do with data centers, generically speaking, when customers ask me, well, we're getting to this point, do we bring in more circuits here in our facility and expand that, or do we move to a co-located situation, and then we're worried about remote access and how do we handle those things, or do we split them, okay, or we do a hybrid? What I can tell you, because I talk about this with prospective customers and in technical groups more so than anything else, because it's sort of what you talk about these days. Most people are planning to do something that's a hybrid. Whether they have an existing data center presence or footprint now or not, what they're looking to do is move those things that fit well to that deployment to a proper data center, and then only keep the things in-house that you maybe care about the most. It's the cattle versus pet scenario. If you need a lot of compute and you need to burst up, you might want to put that in your data center. You can maybe sell off some of that stuff to your own customers, depending on what type of business you're in. You may have, I've seen people buying, they'll buy a rack, they'll use 25 to 50% of it. They'll sell the rest off to maybe their customers, depending on what they're doing for them. So that's going on. You've got other organizations that are offering their own hybrid solutions, maybe doing a Kubernetes sort of deal, and they're going to sell that off to their own people. So, or not even necessarily to their own people, but just as a general service offering. The stuff that they're keeping in-house, everybody's worried about security these days. So if you're involved in things that are HIPAA related, FINRA related, anything that's got a regulatory component to it, you may want to keep that stuff in-house. Other things like, email is sort of a miserable thing to to manage.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and I've seen things like that go sideways because sometimes your mail systems can be bandwidth hogs. People are slamming it all the time. They're attaching things they shouldn't. A lot of times it's an integrated solution, so you may be uploading files to it, and maybe it's you're sharing things back and forth. It doesn't work in a data center sometimes. So you keep it local because it's going to be bandwidth limited. That's where your speed limit is, your performance limits are. So they decide to keep that in house. It's hybrid. I think everything is about the hybrid value proposition these days, and that is going to slide to and from the data center deployment way of doing things based on what we ultimately do with data centers.
Yeah. Well, it's tough. The more that I see about our customers' data centers and how they're actually built and what their bandwidth requirements are, the more I feel uneasy about them having and keeping their own data centers, at least the large scale, because it's so expensive for them and they keep getting smaller. Right. So I don't know. Is that something that you find that do you think there's going to be a time where very few people are going to have anything on site, or that we're just going to have these little tiny modular data centers that are one rack that do everything?
I think we will always have something in terms of a generic data center where it's someone's getting space in it, because at a certain point, the one commonality through all this is power. That is the one thing that no one can get away from. If you're generating your own power, and there's different strategies on that, maybe you can. A lot of the technology really just isn't there yet to have unlimited power. So where you run into, again, it's sort of another limiter, performance limiter of these things is, am I for what I am getting in my compute, whatever that means to you, is the price per, and again, how do you slice this up? Some people will do it by the amount of data moving around. Some people will do it by just raw compute cycles. They'll try to figure that out, which is actually kind of hard to do. Other people will just look at it as a service offering. If I get, what's my profit margin if I keep this in-house versus going to a proper data center? The power consumption is only going to increase to some degree. Right. People say, well, it's going low power. Yeah, but if you have a lot of low power devices, so think of IoT, right? Then where are we really saving? Now, most people would say, sure, because it's just so much different that, it doesn't work out. You could have maybe 1,000 IoT devices before you start really pushing the limit. But with everything going that way, we're just gonna have more. I think we're more on par with current power consumption. We may flatten, right, and maybe go down a little bit as we transition. But we know what happens with human beings. We always want more. So I think there's always going to be something that is going to be appropriate to not be on site. But I do see a lot of talk and a lot of people really considering how can we do this more ourselves, because a lot of this does have to do with security, and data center security I don't think is talked about with enough veracity as it should be. Most data centers are not secure data centers. You could you could run into some of these places. The doors aren't hardened. It's not exterior doors. It's not the type of thing where if someone is challenged with force, it's going to be met with force to stop or slow down an incursion. So I think as security becomes but as more people consider the appropriate amount of security for their data, and some of it's just you don't have to worry about it to that level, but a lot of it you do. And again, anybody who's under anything regulatory, they need it hardened. You have to control physical access. Every data center's got some sort of, hey, who are you? Show me your ID. Are you on are you on the authorization list? But again, when it comes to this whole concept of cybersecurity and cyber warfare, the physical side is not talked about enough. So I think data centers have a really good value proposition there, because they're going to be able to harden their facility in a way that the person working downtown in a city is not going to be able to do. Is your landlord going to allow you to do the things you think you need to do for physical security? Maybe yes, maybe no. But data centers certainly, with the every data center, on an average, would be able to do things to be more physically secure. And if it comes to that being a reason to move, I think the data center is probably going to win every time on that, because they'll be able to adapt to that sort of change as well.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back on Good Data. Today's episode is brought to you by Green Lane Design. Green Lane has been designing, engineering, and building critical facilities for over 10 years, including major enterprise customers as well as colocation facilities. GLD has designed and developed an integrated stack of design disciplines. If you would be interested in a free assessment, go to greenlanedesign.com, click on Contact, and mention the podcast. And we're back. Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about penetration testing and things like that, and I think a lot of it's done on the network side, but you have to think about physical penetration as well. But the fact is that it's not that often that people are stealing hard drives, and that even if they are stolen, they should be encrypted at rest, so it shouldn't matter. But it does matter. Nothing's perfect. And, that kind of brings us into InfoSec and how, security has changed so much. I know one of your degrees, right? You have a master's in data security. So that is really so important right now. And right now it's hard to get guys. So how are you dealing with the kind of needs that are in the marketplace right now and trying to service all of that?
What we try to do is let our clients know where they stand. So for instance, I had a customer a couple of years ago, restaurant owner, and this was right after that big Target point of sale terminal hack. Was it 2 or 3 years ago now? And they were actually referred to me through a mutual friend who also does data security. And I told him, I said, your biggest concern when you've got regulators over you is that if anything ever happens, the feds come on site, they're going to ask you for everything. And what they're trying to ascertain is what do you know what you have, and what are your policies and procedures to remain secure, right? So regardless of whether we're in a data center colo or it's in your offices, when you think about the regulatory side of things, it's the same question. So I tell people all the time, it doesn't matter really what you are doing in terms of your technology, your security stuff and your policies and procedures, it's the same type of thing. So let's get control of this now, and it'll make your future decisions easier, because then you're not saying, well, hey, we're moving to a data center. Oh, we have to be concerned with security. No, you should have been concerned with it already. So the first thing we like to do is give people an audit. So we have a very low cost discovery product that we offer. And we come in and we say, okay, we're going to set up some equipment. It's an inside scan. So the idea is that someone's in your network. What would they do? Okay, if they have no intel on it. We don't ask them any questions. We plug in, do some basic discovery, see what we can see, and we just let the stuff run. We do this on a security distribution of Linux called Kali Linux. And we do discovery on everything we can essentially plug into. And we get a report back. And we get some sort of idea of what you have, where it is physically in the network. We put together a network topology. We will review that with them, and then we'll do a simulated, actually not a simulated attack, we'll actually try to attack a system. So let's say it's, this is, when you talk about attacking systems, it's really mostly about your Windows stuff. So let's take your mail server, right? Because we know that it's got outside access. We'll see if it's based on what we discover. If it's fully patched, we'll try to launch some common attacks against it. And hopefully nothing happens. Hopefully we're not able to get a penetration. If we do, obviously we found something. You need to immediately patch that. But that's your one-off that that's sort of your one-off that you get to see that this is the next level of things we could do, which is an inside, a more well-defined inside penetration test where we'll identify the systems that we think are critical, and customer will tell us what they think is critical, obviously, as well. But then we can schedule something that's a little bit more coordinated. And then from there, we can even do an outside penetration test where we'll get on the other side of your firewall, or just disconnected, and we'll try to do the outside in. And what we aim to do on the other side of that, really just starting with that basic scan, is to show people, hey, look, this is what you have, this is what we think, this is what we would change immediately, maybe as a phase 2, as a goal where you want to be, and then maybe some pie in the sky things, some nice to haves. Hey, this would give you this little bit extra peace of mind. So it's so it's a phased approach, but we try to communicate to people that you at least need to do the basic stuff to understand where you are, because if you can't answer that right away, if something goes wrong, you've got a problem.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree with that those audits are really the key to it, and that the software audits are really important. You need to know that everything is patched and upgraded. But also, one of the things I'm really seeing, and I don't know if you run into this much, is that credential management sucks. And that there are so often people who have been fired, years ago or months ago, who still have credentials, or there are people with VPN access, or, that's actually something that comes down to almost the HR department. And in a lot of companies, it's done poorly. And I still can't believe that, because it's so obvious. And I mean, are there other kind of threat vectors like that you see, or do you see a lot of problems with things like credential management?
I do see major issues with overall identity management, even so much as the working framework of functional versus things versus title, right? I was in a meeting yesterday, in fact, where the owner of the company was saying, we need to do some cleanup on some things, and I'm seeing this data here, and I was trying to explain to him that, you're probably seeing some things that need to be cleaned up, but I'm seeing a lot more. They're like, well, wait a second, I'm not seeing everything. And myself and the operations officer were saying, yeah, you don't have access. And he looked at us like, what do you mean I don't have access? And we're like, you don't have access because you don't need access. You don't need to be an admin on this particular system. So, yeah, of course we're seeing more. You don't want to see all this stuff, So I think, and sometimes that's, by the way, a hard conversation to have, right? People in the C-suite, the business executives, the owners, stakeholders, they don't like to be told no sometimes. And when I explain to them why you really only should have as much access as you need to get your job done, and then maybe some overlap because of people going on vacation, coverage, and things like that. And maybe that's static. Maybe you don't always want to assign that as a just-in-time thing, because that's maybe busy work that you don't need. But at least be mindful of it. So I see huge problems with that. It is, like you said, as an attack vector. We're leaving that surface out there as a gimme to the bad actors. I don't understand it. It's very easy to clip access. I truly do not get that one. It's just a guy leaves and you're cleaning up accounts, and a lot of depending on what you're doing, you've got people. A lot of stuff is cloud hosted, right? So. You'll see people, you have credentials up in the cloud, and it may be something low level. Maybe it's somebody who's just managing a website, right? But if that gets hacked, so how many people run WordPress, right? One of the worst things out there that is, in my book, it's horrible in every way, except that everybody uses it because it makes things simple. And what I like to tell people is that if it's simple for you, it's simple for the people that are going to attack you. So it's not about being simple. It's about doing what's appropriate, within reason. You get a WordPress hack. They happen all the time. You see the credentials. You know who the company is, the customer is. And now that gives somebody intel on possibly some accounts that, may not have been cleaned up, right? When is the last time this was used? Oh, it hasn't been used in a year? Oh, so that guy's gone. Well, let's try another attack. Maybe we got the password from the web stuff, and now we can try to attack your network directly. Once they're in, and all that intel, all that data leakage, that is just a bucket of things that people can dig through, and unfortunately, be inspired to attack you sometimes. It is a huge problem. Huge problem.
Well, you mentioned IoT, and I know that's one of the things that you're getting into right now, and that's a big deal in the industry. But that means that there are so many more. Let's say we define IoT as things that have a cellular connection. That means that those things aren't really within your network, but they might want to get information that's within your network. So that's another way in which you have another complexity that wasn't there 20 years ago. That 20 years ago everything was on net, and now things are getting to you necessarily through public internet, or hopefully there's some kind of good intermediary or firewall, but it's this weird trend of everything's getting more integrated. So you're saying, like for instance, WordPress. There are a lot of backends to WordPress that have database access to things that are customer information or things like that, and you can just do a SQL injection and get some of that information. Right. So I don't really know where I'm going with this because I don't have a question, but do you see that sort of IoT and the addition of more points in the network as being something that even makes InfoSec that much harder?
It makes it harder. I was very much, even still, first of all, IoT really more of a marketing term because we have to sell new stuff. And my issue with that is not you don't want to sell new stuff, but we haven't solved the previous problems. So here we are talking about something new, and everybody's jumping in because it's the brand new shiny thing, and we don't remediate. The biggest problem in technology is that we do not remediate for anything. And I mean that globally to mean we don't clean up and we don't fix things that need to be fixed. You hear all the time about Windows bugs that have been around for 15 years, right? We recently had one in Linux that had been around for about 15 years too. That some people finally said, "Wow, we need to fix this one." Fortunately, it was a very, very difficult attack surface, but it was one of those things that it set a lot of people up. They're like, "Good grief, how could this be missed?" And it just doesn't happen in the open source world as much. But it's one of those things that humans get wrong more often than not, because so much of this stuff really is software driven and people just want to get things out. IoT though is so much more of a risk because, like you say, with that stuff, it is designed, the whole purpose of it is to take information from inside of something that is yours and get it out there to the internet so that someone else can do something with it for your benefit. But they're also getting a benefit of this massive aggregation of things. You look at the Amazon Echo, right? It's always on. I don't have one because it's always on. But even I'm an Android person. I turn off all the automated, OK Google, all that stuff. It's turned off because all that stuff is just information that's constantly. It's a slow drip outside of my network, outside of my control. And yeah, there's an argument for greater good where, it's helping machine intelligence and it's helping handwriting recognition for that type of stuff. But all these things for that greater good puts us at greater risk. So what do? One of the things is that with IoT, the thing that everybody pretty much gets wrong in IoT, and part of it is because a lot of the developers are younger, they do not think of security the way people who are a little bit older do. And that's just, and it's not to knock younger people, their experience is naturally different. But we have never stressed security by design in high technology. So from the 90s on, we've always been behind the curve. You get to the last couple of years, let's just say the 2010s, right? This current decade that's almost over. And it's jumped up a notch. So it's not their fault because why would you know about something that's never been stressed, right? But it creates an opportunity for everything going on and people saying we need to address this. And for those people who have been security professionals, maybe in other places, to say, look, this is how we do this. We have all the technology to do it. It's really not that difficult. And there's a number of things I've done in that space that are just very, very basic, but essential to any sort of basic security operation of being able to protect data. And we just don't have enough people doing it. So it is a huge problem, but for me, it's also a huge opportunity because it doesn't take much. For instance, let's think of thermostats, okay, and your ability to control your thermostat or your smart switches over the internet. A lot of these things send this information in the clear. Instead of doing that, you can literally hash this stuff. It's a one-way hash function. It's the most basic thing you can do, right? Most of these systems embedded, the typical ARM microcontrollers, they can do hashing pretty quickly. It's computationally intensive, but things are so, the processing speeds are there so that we can do this. So that type of thing, it really doesn't cost you anything. It's, the amount of additional electricity for that compute, if it's an ARM chip, maybe you're firing up the big cores instead of the littles or whatever. It doesn't take much. So something as simple as that protects you. And if you and it protects you, you still have to do it right, because hashing is it still needs to be done right. You can actually do that wrong and be at risk.
Right.
If you do it right, it gives you something that is easily protectable. And the other thing is that we don't layer these things. I do a lot of encrypted systems as well, because like you said, if you're hosting, you should be at least encrypting data at rest. And if you're not doing it in flight, you're nuts. But you got to do both, right? So that's perfectly encrypted. Someone takes physical control of it, they're going to have a huge problem. Well, most people that I know, they only do one layer of encryption. I never understood that either. Why would you only do one layer, right? You should certainly be encrypting your disk, but you've got a lot of people doing things that are containerized or in virtual machines. If you're in a virtual machine, why is your system and your VM booting and everything's in the clear? You could also do encryption in that. And there's ways to have it so that it can automatically unlock and things like that. But we just don't take the time to really think through those things, because in all honesty, I think it's a bury your head in the sand to ignore the reality. Because if I admit that I have to do this, then I have to admit that there's a problem, a real problem. And I think for, in particular, the American market, we just do not have in our DNA, post World War II, which includes me, but my parents are are old enough to have communicated to me. But I think it's this post World War II idea that everything is so much better, we're so evolved, and everything's fine, and it really isn't. Security is nothing to be scared of. It's just a proper way to make sure that your data is what you say it is. It guarantees the authenticity of your data, and sometimes I talk about it that way. So it's because it's a softer spin on it to get people to realize that, look, forget about keeping people out or in, whatever parlance you want to use in terms of what you're doing. Let's just talk about the understanding that if I look up something in a database, that data is true. That your social security number is your social security number. Okay. If it's secure, it protects from human error. It doesn't have to be the sort of dark and stormy way to look at things. It could be a data fidelity sort of conversation as well. So I think maybe talking about it in a different way can help, but IoT unnecessarily increases the attack surface, and we're going to have to address it because it's not going away.
Yeah, you touched on so many things. I wish I could delve into all of them. No, it's great. I love it. But IoT, it always makes me think of anonymization. That for a person like your gate can be an identifier. If you have location data, your location data, even though it's anonymized, mm-hmm. you spend a lot of time in your house, so it's right. Really not anonymized. It has to be anonymized properly, right. And it's actually a very difficult thing to do. But also, you went so many places. I feel like I have to put a pin in that, because it's the next part is also you're really an open source advocate, and talking about open source applications and how that can mitigate security risks, and also I don't know how much you worry about the actual framework around open source and how some of that's getting degraded. like, there's a lot of open source software that's currently dormant. And so there's no real admin for it, but it is a threat vector because it's used all over the place. So
right,
I don't even know where to start with that. But what do can you just talk about open source and what your current feeling about the landscape is?
Well, putting aside my bias, because I obviously have one, in looking at things in a pragmatic form, because you're right, that's actually one of the things that people don't talk about enough. When something is no longer being supported, and you'll see this, and this happens in everything, right? Closed source, open source doesn't matter. Some things happen. Projects in the open source world sometimes get abandoned. People can no longer support them. They get scooped up by a Google or an Amazon or whoever, and they don't necessarily have the time. I've seen people hired who have done awesome work in open source, and then they go work for some company because of that DNA, and then the project that got them that position goes away or starts to wane or just isn't taken care of enough because, you're human. There's only so many hours in a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that the open source community is getting better at, especially in the last couple of years, I've seen a much better organization in terms of succession control. If something happens to this guy who's a core developer for whatever product, well, we've got a team of people ready to take over their apprenticing now. They're already actively submitting patches and things like that. The value proposition still favors open source because we can adapt quicker. There's just you cannot get a closed source project to move as quickly as an open source project, and that discussion's sort of been settled. But because of that, you'll constantly see things like people say, well, I did this code, fork it here. A lot of people are, like Git. I happen to not like it. But there's a lot of people who host things on Git or GitLab now since Microsoft bought Git. People want to run away from it. They'll say, oh, fork the code and then commit back. Well, maybe instead of forking the code because you want to get what you want, and certainly, you commit back, but maybe you should focus on making that existing code base better, especially if it's, still the main thing, right? So I think some of that, all the typical human condition applies, right? You've got ego problems, you've got again time problems, time management, only so many hours in a day. You've also got evolution, right? Things that are new, exciting today simply may not be the thing in a couple of years. The whole we touched on SQL, right? So the whole NoSQL thing, because of Hadoop and big data, became a thing. And then all of a sudden, we're talking about not SQL or XML, rather, we're talking about JSON, right? Well, the people who were doing SQL databases, they had to take a look at things and say, well, look, relational stuff is still king, but that doesn't mean it'll always be king. What can we learn from the NoSQL environment? I write all my applications with Postgres. Long-time user of that open source project, supported by Enterprise DB. And they, a couple of years ago, really embarked on adding a full feature set of NoSQL functionality. And now, in one database system, generically speaking, I have relational data, and I can have unstructured or unrelational data, or unrelated data, or asymmetric data, however you want to call it. Things that MongoDB, when it came on the scene, was just lauded because of how fast it was at handling this stuff. Well, Postgres is now actually faster than MongoDB. So I think that sort of thing also has to be considered in the open source world. Again, overall, we still do better in open source, but there's a recognition now, because it's certainly considered to be more mature, that some of these things that the closed source world always is worried about, the open source people have to worry about as well. If you're spinning down a project, offer it up, if something is open source, that wasn't, I'm sorry, if something was closed source that you didn't open up for whatever reason, maybe that was your last little secret sauce, as I like to call it, but it's a relevant project, and like you said, it's unmaintained. You know what? Maybe it's time to open source that if you're not going to take care of it anymore, or let people know where they should go. There's nothing wrong with moving on and moving ahead and letting other people come in and take over a project if you're not going to take care of it. But it is something that we need to do. But I think we're doing a pretty good job of it, because at the end of the day, you can always pull somebody in to be your on-site programmer or your consultant to fix some of these problems and at least get it up to par so that it's manageable. And then you can make the decision whether you're going to move or not.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that I was anti-open source, because I'm very pro-open source, but it is part of the discussion to say,
oh, sure. Yeah.
Like,
take it this way. It's valid.
Yeah,
it's a very valid question.
Just in terms of security, like how can you really get a good understanding of the threat vectors on something that you can't see the code behind? Like the part of the problem also is DRM, that it's illegal to attack proprietary software. So if there's DRM on open source projects, then it kind of breaks the open source model. It's very it's a weird time right now that so much of the internet is based on open source software, but that some of that stuff is closing in more and more and more, and I think it makes it a lot more fragile. There's a lot of fragility that is kind of creeping into the system right now. And I guess that's vague, but
yeah, no, I agree with that. It's like you're saying, at the end of the day, penetration testing or the research. Let's just talk about the researchers, right? If they're not, for lack of a better way to put this, legally allowed, or they have legal cover to do the research on some of these things, which means, I don't know, it could mean pulling chips off of a board and decompiling them to see what's going on so they can understand the threat vector. And is that legal? Or, I mean, you don't talk about it, maybe out of sight, out of mind, but ultimately you can't talk about your findings because it would expose you to a risk. We can certainly get into a point where even the open source world has a problem, but there's a lot of black box stuff we can do, because one of the benefits of open source is that you can generally get it, right? So if I can get it, I can do I'm attacking the black box thing, okay? And I can see what the responses are, and I can still maybe get a better idea of what I can do, because I'll have some visibility. I may not be completely granular, whereas something closed source, I can do the same thing, but I won't be able to get in the box at all. So there is a balance that we have to figure out. I think Google and some other people do it the right way, where they say, hey, look, if you find something, let us know first. We'll pay you. We'll pay you for your finding, and then you sign the NDA, and that's the end of it. We can fix it. I think that's a good way to do it. Some people don't like that. You've got these I don't know what to call them, digital evangelists. I don't know. I don't have the right term for it, but you've got some people that say, well, no, if you find something, you should put it out to the community. And I don't know if I agree with that 100%. I get it. If you find something that is research worthy, that maybe needs to go out. But I think if it's putting things at risk, for like a Google or an Amazon or anybody who's doing some of this, these hosted things, even like a WordPress, WordPress should probably put more bounties on things, and maybe they could pull together a better framework. I mean, you mentioned frameworks, and I mean, WordPress is one of the things that really just scares me to death. I won't let it run on my shared platform. Anybody doing that stuff with me, they have to be on a VM. I'm going to put up as many barriers as I can, because it's the framework that's the biggest problem. It's a lot of people writing a lot of code that is, is not good code, and probably more cases than not. But in other cases, it's the PHP framework itself that we know it's got a long history of not being the most secure. It's way better now. I mean, to the point a couple of years ago, or actually probably about 10 years ago now, I remember reading something that even the PHP people were upset with WordPress because of some of the things they were doing. So I think these frameworks do the people managing them, whether they engage with the community more and have standing bounties on things. It doesn't have to be a lot. I hope people aren't using these bounties as a way to get rich or anything like that. I don't think it's about that. I think it's about having the best software out there. You're certainly getting the recognition for discovering it, and then maybe that's it. You can't talk about NDA, but the person gets credit. If you want to build your skills as a security researcher, I don't see a problem with that. You should be paid for your time and for your work, but the reality is that we sometimes want to fix things and not talk about it, and I think that's perfectly fine. Probably more of that should happen, not less.
So I hate to go back, but we're running out of time, and I just want to get back to, we talked about hybrid, and we talked about on-premise colocation, but we didn't really talk about cloud. And, I think there are a lot of interesting things happening in that space. It's getting, the Kubernetes have come along, and then there's Amazon Outposts, which allows you to have basically managed hardware on site. And there are other people who do that too. So you have hardware as a service that actually can live at your own facility or in your colo. And then Google just came out with one that's in beta. That's the same thing as Amazon Outposts. So I was just wondering if you feel like that's a good trend to have sort of somebody else managing your hardware. If you feel like it's a good trend to have that kind of hybrid model of on-prem, colo, and cloud. And I'm sorry, there's so much other stuff. It's such a huge topic. But I was just wondering what you're feeling about it is.
I personally am not. Again, cloud, it's a marketing term. It's remote services, right? So we've been doing this forever. But it's it's okay. It is different in terms of how it's structured. I've never really been a fan of it. I've got guys that got deep into it, and consequently, some of them have been frustrated. Others have started to realize the reality of it, that it is not the silver bullet. It's not the one solution to rule them all. I think, unfortunately, a lot of times companies are looking to get rid of people and replace them with technology, and that most definitely has not happened. If anything, it's brought on more people, because the cloud stuff, especially if you look at an Amazon, who's got a lot of, Amazon's, I guess it's microservices, really, some of the traditional AWS type things, where it's very granular, which is good because you can bill in very small increments. But what I've found with cloud, since its inception, is that it really only works for a very narrow set of mission parameters, right? When you look at all the things you can do, when you talk about 100% cloud, it's just not going to work for the vast majority of people. There's always going to be, I think, some sort of hybrid. It's good to hear that Amazon and others are coming up with some different things. I know, Kubernetes, which is, from Google, something they open sourced so that, other people get their hands on it. I'm always going to be a fan of people having their own technical people in-house, or using consultants like me who are going to be more like a partner. I mean, as a consultant, I'm just really just someone who's outside the agency, who's going to bring a whole variety of skill sets to bear, because I'm looking across all my clients, and I can leverage that for any particular client. But, we're just, it's like outside counsel, right? We're here for you, so we're part of the team. I think it's always better to go that route and have people build specifically for your presence, as opposed to, 100%, here's our box, we're going to manage it, drop it off one site, it's sort of sealed off from you. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I do think for certain cases that may be a good idea, but most of the time I don't think that's a good idea. That people who produce data own their data, And there's a lot of discussion now. You look at what's going on with Facebook, the concept of, well, Facebook owns all your data. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I'm waiting for the Supreme Court challenge to it, because I think that's completely wrong. Facebook would not be Facebook without people putting their data in. So I think ultimately, legally, it's a bad idea, and I think, practically speaking, it's not a good idea either. So can it work? Sure. I think it will, and the fact that they're doing it means that they know something was missing. So, like I said, I think cloud was always overhyped, just like a lot of things are initially. But it's a good trend. I mean, that's some of my guys are looking at Kubernetes and looking at doing some pretty interesting things with that. I looked at Apache Mythos a couple of years ago, and I think it's a great tool for data centers, especially for the data center that's, it's an in-house data center, right? A company owns it, their business lines are in there, but something like an Apache Mythos, which is the free version, but DCOS, which is the paid version, I think that's a great idea how you can put your traditional compute workloads next to your, say, Hadoop and big data workloads, or your NoSQL stuff, right? The ability to have some elasticity in how that's managed, I think that's a great idea. But again, that's in-house. That's somebody saying, we're looking at our complete data center, and we're going to be able to dynamically assign resources. I think that's the better way to go. I hope that wins out. But Amazon in particular has a lot of money. They can certainly make this more loss leader than probably anybody else, including Microsoft, other than Google. And Google's changing now. I'm not real happy with some of what Google's done recently with we're shutting down services and some of the things. I'm one of those people that's wearing the black armband because Google Plus is shutting down. But right. I don't like how they're being run right now because of that, but some other things as well. I think they're still a good steward of, in particular, open source technology. But I think they're a good technology company still. But I think we need to continue to develop and nurture the skills in-house, because if you don't know what's going on with your data, you don't know what's going on with your business.
I 100% agree. And I hate to say it because I could talk to you for hours, Keith, but I think we have to end it there.
Sure.
Yeah. So how can people find you online? You're on LinkedIn, but is there any other stuff?
Well, pretty much through my website, daotechnologies.com. You can, put the www in front of that, but either way. LinkedIn is another choice. That's, sometimes people hit me there, but really the website. And, send me an email. There's an info link, email address on there that actually comes directly to me. But I'm always looking to help people get control of their technology and solve some of those pain points, and help people do business and help people do better in their operations, and really make this technology work for you. Because like you said, it is, almost everything we could touch on is its own topic that you can talk hours about and get into. There's so much these days. It's every day it's a learning experience. If I'm not helping clients, I'm reading and I'm researching. So I appreciate having the conversation with you and getting the information out. It's this is good. You're doing a good service. Talk about the data center side of things. It's something that gets overlooked.
Yeah, well, I would love to have you come on again. I feel like there's a lot more to talk about, and I just really appreciated talking to you. So.
Sure,
thank you very much, Keith.
Happy to do it. Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for having me. And yeah, if you want to do it again, I'd be happy to do it.
That's our show. I'd like to thank Keith Perry. You can find him on LinkedIn and at daotechnologies.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. Our Twitter is at data_good. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Greenlane Design, www.greenlanedesign.com. Be good, everybody. We'll talk to you next time on the podcast.